If you're in Pittsburgh and you hear a mysterious recording of a baby crying or a child calling for help, lock your door. I have like 5 minutes to do my makeup. So more and more people in Pittsburgh are complaining about hearing babies crying outside of their windows at night, as was the case with Olivia Bennington last week. Her sister claimed that Olivia would wake up every night at 3 a.m. claiming that there was a baby wailing outside of her window. But her sister never heard anything and honestly felt like Olivia was going crazy. Then one day, Olivia's sister came home to find Olivia packing an overnight bag. Olivia said she had to leave. There was something outside of her window tormenting her. If it wasn't a baby, then she had no idea what it was, but it felt like it was something evil. Olivia couldn't stop her sister from leaving. And she's the 5th person this month to go missing after having similar complaints.
Did you know that there was a murder in real life inspired by the movie Scream? The murder was committed by these two, Brian and Tori, when they killed their friend Cassie Jo back in 2006. Cassie was your average high school girl and she was actually their friend. But on that fateful night, they snuck into her house, and when her boyfriend, Cassie's boyfriend, left for the night, they came up from the basement and stabbed her to death. And they wanted to make it seem like a horror movie. These are the actual masks that they wore when they snuck up and killed Cassie. Like I said, these are real crime scene photos. They, after the murders, went and buried all of the evidence. Just look at these things. And here's one of the knives that they had on them. But the craziest part of all of this is that Brian and Tori actually recorded a lot of the murder before and after and their thoughts and plans to kill Cassie on VHS tape. If you want to listen to those audio tapes and hear the full story of Cassie Jo Stoddart's murder, you can listen to my podcast I co-host with my girlfriend Courtney, Murder in America. You can listen to it for free on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Just look up episode number 6, The Scream Killers. I promise you, the story does not disappoint.
Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew. Caleb Posey, who you might recognize from this gif from the show Toddlers and Tiaras, went to her prom this past weekend and took her own life just a few hours later. The dinosaurs in Jurassic Park were not animated. Most of them were just actors in costumes. This photo shows Ismail Hadi, a homeless man from Yemen known for feeding stray dogs. One morning he was found dead, with the dogs refusing to leave his side. A new device in South Africa called Rapex resembles a tube with barbs inside that is inserted like a tampon to prevent sexual assault. Any man who attempts an unconsentful act will be impaled by its teeth and sent to the ER. This 7-year-old girl is the only person in the world with diagnosed chromosome 6 deletion, meaning that she doesn't feel pain, hunger, or the need to sleep. In 2016, she was hit by a car, dragged nearly 100 feet, and felt absolutely nothing.
You ever heard the urban legend of Teke Teke?
No, I don't think so.
It's one from Japan, and it's this story of this girl who was an officer in the army, but she was assaulted by some soldiers, and either she threw herself or she got thrown onto a railroad track and got run over by the train.
Oh my gosh, bro.
It cut her in half, and now she wanders the streets of Japan, just her top half. And the reason her name is Teke Teke is because that's the sound her nails make against the ground as she
Bro, I have chills
and
right now.
comes at you. And if you ever see her and you make eye contact with her, she's gonna come after you. If you manage to get away, you have 3 days before she comes and finds you.
Ugh, I don't like this one.
It's especially bad if you're there and you're wearing red while crossing a railroad track, because she hates the color red because it reminds her of her blood
Oh my
when
god,
she was murdered.
that's so sad.
And just a little bit of extra spice for your life. Just so all you know, there's a part of this legend that says, once you hear this,
we need to talk about what happened to Sally Stitch. Sally was a girl from a small village in the middle of the mountains. People described her as shy and awkward, and there was one group of kids who would always bully her. One day as Sally was walking home, the bullies found her and started throwing rocks at her. But then Sally did something that shocked them. She pointed at one of the bullies and said, "You will die in 3 days." At first they thought this must be a joke, but 3 days later that boy started unexpectedly throwing up blood. The doctors couldn't find out what caused it, and he passed away exactly when Sally predicted. Soon everyone knew about Sally's ability, and it really scared them. So a group of villagers lured Sally into an abandoned mine. And once no one could see her or hear her scream, they tied her to a chair and took out a sewing needle. They stitched Sally's lips together so she could never foretell another death. Then they left her in the mine and sealed the door closed. It's said that since Sally passed away alone in the dark and unable to scream, she now haunts anyone who knows what really happened to her. And once you hear her story, you have to pass it on to someone else, or she'll appear by your bed with a needle to make sure you never speak again. So send this story to someone else and follow for more.
I killed and ate a man after seeing an ad on the internet looking for someone who was willing to be eaten alive. My name is Armin Maywes. I was born in Germany in 1961 and have been developing cannibalistic fantasies since childhood. This led to a terrible act in 2000. At that time, I published an advert on the internet looking for volunteers who were willing to be killed and eaten. A man named Bernd Brandis replied and came a month after mutual agreement. I killed him and began devouring his flesh. We filmed part of the crime. I ate his flesh for several months. In 2002, the police discovered my actions after an investigation and I was arrested for my crime. I was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison for the murder of a man. In 2004, my case was reopened and my sentence increased. I was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Since then, I've been in prison and my story has gained worldwide notoriety. I'm A.
Don't smile at this picture, but you'll never have the courage to look at it all the way anyway. I'll show you a photo of a woman, or rather a terrifying thing that changes as you look at it. Before I show it to you, I must warn you that I can only protect my subscribers who have shared and liked this video. The woman in this video is Sarah, and whoever smiles at her photo witnesses paranormal phenomena shortly afterwards. She was a woman like any other, with an ordinary life. But what happens to her is anything but ordinary. As she filmed herself for her blog, her face began to change in frightening ways. Little by little, her face began to transform in unimaginable ways. Her face became something non-human, disturbing, frightening. Are you ready to see the end of the video?
I'm watching you. I'm in here. Come and find me. I'm watching you. I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
What started as an innocent phone call from his girlfriend quickly turned into a nightmare. Hearing her scream on the phone, he realised he only had minutes to try and save her. On a warm April evening in Clinton, Missouri, Angela Hammond was happily chatting from a payphone to her boyfriend, Rob Schaefer, laughing and joking as they usually did. Suddenly her mood changed. Concerned, Rob asked what was wrong. Angela said that a green pickup truck was driving suspiciously close to her. As Rob tried to reassure Angela, she became even more frantic. "It's pulling up next to me." The next sound Rob would hear was screaming. Panicked, he ran to his car and raced to the payphone, desperately hoping he would arrive in time. He caught a glimpse of the green truck that Angela had described, heading in the opposite direction. He felt a moment of relief. He wasn't too late. Maybe he could save her. Rob slammed his car into reverse to give chase, but the sudden and violent gear change blew his transmission, and his car rolled to a stop. He had to watch as the truck took his loved one away from him while he was powerless to stop it. Angela was 4 months pregnant, and unfortunately has remained missing for 30 years.
Terrifying encounter that left a man dead. In 1991, an incident unfolded that would forever chill the hearts of those who heard about it. The lifeless body of Christopher Case was discovered in a haunting scene, clothed and curled up in his own bathtub. This grim discovery marked the beginning of a tale that would make even the bravest soul shudder. The police sought to shed light on Christopher's final moments. In their quest for answers, they turned to his closest friend, Sammy. What she shared with them was deeply disturbing. A phone call that would forever haunt her own dreams. Christopher revealed that he had awoken from his sleep as a figure emerged from the shadows beneath his bed. It formed a black abyss, rose up to a towering height, and casted a indescribable dread upon his soul. The dark entity, wicked grasp wrapped around his throat, tightening until his consciousness slipped away. When the morning sunlight pierced through the curtains, Christopher regained consciousness, his hand instinctively reaching for his throat. The touch confirmed his worst fears as his fingers met swollen flesh and bruises. As Christopher poured out this account to Sammy, he shared his fear, dreading nightfall. And in that moment, their conversation took a sinister turn. A hushed whispering infiltrated the air outside his room. Then in an instant, the phone connection was severed. Like and follow, because my next story is even crazier.
My wife is very possessive of our son. My son was born about 7 months ago, and I can count on one hand how many times I have actually held him. My wife had become extremely protective of him and refused to let anyone else but her hold him. I have tried talking to her about this, but she will just turn the conversation around and imply that I am suggesting that she is a bad mother. A doctor friend of mine told me that she probably has postpartum depression and that I just need to support her. I have tried this, but honestly, it is heartbreaking not being able to spend time with my son. I have tried offering to feed him, but she refuses as a mother's milk is important. Every night, I am awoken by the sounds of his crying, and my wife will practically sprint out of the bed to go feed him. Tonight, I woke up and could hear his cries from his nursery. I glanced over at my wife and was relieved that she was fast asleep with her phone in her hand. I quietly walked into the nursery and carefully picked up my son's crying body. I heard something drop to the floor and bent down to pick it up. A chill ran up my spine as I picked up the speaker that was playing a baby's cries. I almost vomited as I unfolded my son's blankets to discover his rotting remains inside. My wife ran up behind me and snatched the body from my hands and brought it up to her breast. I could see the madness in her eyes as she pressed a button on her phone, and the speaker started playing a suckling noise.
The Teletubbies might have been inspired by a Bulgarian children's asylum called La La Land. The children in the asylum were treated terribly, locked in cold, dark rooms, abused, and starved. All of the children had facial deformities from being starved and beaten, causing them to smile constantly. The isolation led them to sing and dance by themselves, even without music. They would only speak gibberish when spoken to because they didn't understand Bulgarian or how to communicate in general. The 4 children met a horrific demise on the same day, and it's said that they are the 4 characters in the Teletubbies show. A 7-year-old with a facial deformity and deafness was a troublesome child who often was locked outside. Frostbite turned his limbs permanently blue, likely inspiring Tinky Winky's purple color. Another child had a facial deformity that stretched her face into a permanent smile. Locked in a cold, dark room for 5 years, she danced around without music. Lala's character and the yellow color were inspired by her. A 6-year-old mute boy was often sick and starved. He frequently vomited and was left face down in it by his caretakers. His character Dipsy and the color green likely came from his sickly appearance. The youngest child was abandoned at birth with a deformed face, causing a creepy smile. She suffered a terrible incident when caretakers threw her into a fire, inspiring Poe's character and the color. The reason behind the Teletubbies' television stomachs was linked to the children's only source of comfort in the asylum, which was television, and it played constantly. When they overheard the director planning to remove their TVs, they panicked. In desperation, they hid 4 televisions in their stomachs, following the practice of swallowing toys. The next day, they were found in agony, having clawed their stomachs open to reveal the televisions. This disturbing image became the basis for the Teletubbies design, with TVs inserted in their stomachs where they watch videos sent by kids.
My sister has been rotting in the living room for 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, my little sister, Becky, had an asthma attack. Her inhalers were not helping, and Mum tried everything she could to save her. I'll never forget that look on Becky's face as she struggled for breath, or the way that she scratched at her throat desperately, before finally her panicked eyes rolled into the back of her skull in defeat. She died on the living room floor, cradled in my mother's arms. Mum didn't call an ambulance, she didn't do anything. She just held Becky's lifeless body tightly, and cried. I decided that I would call the ambulance myself, but as soon as Mum saw the phone in my hand, she got mad. Don't you dare, she screamed, before holding her hand out. Give me the phone. I should have called an ambulance, but I was scared of the insanity in my mother's eyes, like she was about to explode at any moment. I reluctantly handed the phone over to her. Then I was sent up to my room. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just laid in bed, completely in shock, as I attempted to fight back tears. But they soon came flooding anyway when the realization hit me, Becky's dead, and I'm never going to see her again. The next morning, I went downstairs, and heard the television blaring loudly from the living room. I slowly made my way towards the sound, and I was not prepared for what I was about to see. Paw Patrol was playing on the TV, as Becky's pale body was propped up on the sofa watching her favorite show. Her eyelids had been crudely stitched to her forehead so that her white eyes would stay open. She almost looked like a doll with how rigid she sat upright on the sofa. Mum walked in and greeted me with a smile. Good morning, sweetheart, she said, before kissing me on the cheek. Sit down with your sister, and I'll go make you a nice cup of tea. I lost it at that point, and told her how crazy it all was, and that Becky wasn't alive anymore. But then Mum slapped me so hard that she busted my lip. I didn't argue with her anymore after that. The days went by, and the smell of decay got worse. Becky's decomposing body never moved from the sofa, and Paw Patrol never stopped playing. But that was weeks ago now. I can't even go into the living room anymore. I can't bear to see the maggots squirming around inside her empty eye sockets, or the rotten skin falling from her decayed, larvae-covered flesh. Mom has got worse too. Not only is she still in her happy family fantasy, but she has also boarded up all the windows, and she has installed new locks on the front door. I'm not allowed outside anymore either, and it's driving me mad. I don't know how many more brother-sister bonding activities I can take.
I killed my wife, my 4 children, and my 2 dogs. I'm one of the most wanted Frenchmen in the world. But nobody knows if I'm dead or alive. My name is Xavier Dupont de Ligons, and this is my story. I was born on January 9th, 1961 in Versailles. My father was a wealthy industrialist, my mother a housewife. My childhood was rather privileged, but marked by a certain moral and religious rigidity. After graduating from high school, I studied in the United States. I learned about finance and obtained a degree in international business. On my return to France, I married Agnes and we had 4 children. We settled in Nantes in 1997. Our life seemed ideal from the outside, but in reality, our marriage was far from perfect. Over the years, I experienced financial difficulties, and my situation worsened with the economic crisis of 2008. That's when I started to get into serious debt, borrowing money from relatives and banks. I'd go upstairs to my wife and family and tell them everything was fine. I couldn't bring myself to admit to them that I had become a failure. In March 2011, in order not to lose face, I drew up a plan. I took shooting lessons and bought a silencer for my rifle. With the children's help, I bought some land, concrete, and large garbage bags to work on the house. On the evening of April 3rd, we went to a restaurant and then to the cinema. That was the last time anyone saw us. The very next day, I sent a note of absence for the children and a work stoppage for my wife. I also sent a letter to my friends and family explaining that we were in danger and that the American government had hidden us. On April 21st, my name made the headlines after the bodies of my wife, Agnes, and our 4 children, Arthur, Thomas, and Benoit, were discovered under the terrace of our house. I became the only suspect. Thanks to my plan, I had already been on the run for several days. I crossed France and was last seen in Roquebrune-sur-Argent, in the south of France. The French and international authorities issued arrest warrants for me. Since then, there have been numerous sightings all over the world, like in 2019 when a man was arrested in Scotland, but it wasn't me. Today, my story has become one of France's most famous criminal enigmas, and I continue to fascinate and captivate public opinion. For some, I committed suicide. For others, I've rebuilt my life abroad. What do you think?
After the events involving Jason Voorhees at Pinehurst Halfway House, Camp Crystal Lake was renamed Forest Green. Tommy Jarvis returned to Forest Green with his friend Alan, in the hopes that they would cremate Jason's body. Tommy hoped that would finally end his hallucinations. They dug up Jason's body from the cemetery, but Tommy had a flashback of murdering Jason when he saw his body. Tommy snapped and stabbed Jason's corpse with a metal fence post. Lightning then struck the metal post and revived Jason. Jason then killed Alan and retrieved his hockey mask, which Tommy had brought with him to the cemetery. Tommy made his way to the sheriff's office but was arrested. Sheriff Garris, who was well aware of Tommy's mental problems, ignored his warning that Jason had returned. Soon after, councillors Darren and Lisbeth got lost looking for the camp and ran into Jason. He promptly killed them using the metal post that had resurrected him. The following day, Sheriff Garris's daughter Megan, her friends Sissy and Court, and Lisbeth's sister Paula asked him to search for the missing pair. Tommy warned them about Jason, but as usual he was ignored. Jason then stumbled across a corporate paintball game in the woods. He proceeded to kill every player and took their equipment. Jason soon realised his newfound strength as he ripped off one of the paintballers' arms by accident. The campers then arrived at Forest Green, whilst the councillors did their best to run it without Darren and Lisbeth. Sheriff Garris then attempted to escort Tommy out of his jurisdiction, due to his influence on Megan as she developed a crush on him. Tommy briefly escaped and ran to Jason's grave, but the caretaker had covered it up. Alan's body was now in Jason's place. Tommy was then escorted out of town. That night, Jason murdered the caretaker and a nearby couple who witnessed the murder. Court and a girl named Nikki were then killed by Jason. Sheriff Garris's deputies then found the bodies of the victims, and he immediately implicated Tommy in the murders. Tommy then contacted Megan and convinced her to help him lure Jason back to Camp Crystal Lake. He didn't realise that Jason had already made his way back to the camp and killed Sissy and Paula. He then killed Sheriff Garris and two of his deputies. After arriving at the camp with Tommy, Megan was confronted by Jason. Just as he was about to kill her, Tommy called to him from the lake. Jason left Megan, opting instead to go for his killer, Tommy. Jason then attacked Tommy in a boat in the middle of the lake, but Tommy managed to secure a chain around Jason's neck which was attached to a boulder. Jason jumped onto Tommy and snapped the boat in half, dragging Tommy to the bottom of the lake with him. Jason then strangled Tommy underwater before letting his body float to the surface. Whilst trying to recover Tommy's body, Megan had her leg grabbed by Jason. She then turned the boat's motor on and sliced Jason's throat with it. Back on shore, Tommy was successfully revived by Megan after she used CPR. You may be wondering if Jason died after all that. Comment for part 7 and I'll let you know. You might not believe it, but this story gets even weirder. You've got to love Jason, haven't you?
Top 5 of the scariest videos I found online. I bet you can't make it to the end of the video. The last one is scary. Number 5. 3 friends were playing guitar and singing in their room. You know, just having a good time. When something scary appears in the balcony door window. You could see a white figure appear quickly and disappear once the camera pans back. Woo! Spicy. Hey, maybe you just like the music. Wanted to do a little dance. Get a little boogie. Get it? Boogie, boo. Please don't unfollow me. Before we get to the next one, can you hit that like button for me? If you get 100,000 hearts, I'll do a part 3. Number 4. A man wakes up to hearing strange noises in his house. When he goes to turn on the lights to see what it is, they seem to not be working. Watch what he sees next. Tired of these ghosts messing with electricity when they do not pay bills. Do you know how much an electric bill is right now? Pay up or get out. Okay, check this out. You're alone in the middle of the night and you're in a hotel when this happens. What's your next move? Let me know down below. Number 3, on the 30th of April, 2022 at 2 a.m., a security camera captured this. Some believe it's a creature dragging a bag, while others believe it's someone walking backwards. A short while after, the security camera catches this. It's the same figure. What do you think this creature is? Number 2, the little girl is in the kitchen alone, and it looks like she's talking to someone. The home security camera captures this. So now they're not paying bills and trying to take our food? This is the last straw. Hello, Ghostbusters. A woman and her child is seeing something in the window, but every time she goes to open it, nothing appears to be there. Watch what happens next. Yeah, it got in the house, and they didn't even realize. Should I do a part 3?
The Candyman Killer. Dean Corll, commonly known as the Candyman Killer, was a real-life serial killer who operated in Houston, Texas during the early 1970s. Corll, along with two teenage accomplices, David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, was responsible for the brutal torture, R-wording, and unalivement of at least 28 young boys. Dean Corll was born on December 24, 1939 in Fort Wayne, Indiana in the late 1960s, and then he moved to Houston. Corll was also known as the Candyman and the Pied Piper because he and his family had previously owned and operated a candy factory in Houston Heights, and he had been known to give free candy to local children. Corll used his friendly persona to lure young boys, usually between the ages of 13 and 19, into his home or van and told them that he would bring them to parties or social events. They would then be restrained either by force or deception, and each was unalived either by strangulation or shooting with a .22 caliber pistol. Once he had the victims in his control, he would torture, SA, and ultimately unalive them. Several victims were friends with one or both of Corll's accomplices. Others were individuals whom Corll had himself become acquainted with prior to the abduction and murder. Two other victims, Billy Blanche and Gregory Malley Winkle, were former employees of the Corll Candy Company. Once at Corll's residence, the youths would be given drugs or alcohol until they passed out, or tricked into putting on handcuffs, or even grabbed by force. They were then stripped naked and tied to either Corll's bed or usually a plywood torture board, which was regularly hung on the wall. Once the victims had been murdered, their bodies were tied in plastic sheeting. Corll and his accomplices buried 17 of their victims in a rented boat shed. 4 other victims were buried in woodland near Lake Sam, Rayburn. 1 victim was buried on a beach in Jefferson County, and at least 6 victims were buried on a beach on the Bolivar Peninsula. In several instances, Corll forced his victims to either phone or write to their parents with explanations for their absences, trying to deter their parents' fears for their son's safety. He is also known to have retained keepsakes, usually keys, from his victims. The gruesome details of Corll's crimes became known in 1973 as the Houston Mass Murders, which came to light after Henley fatally shot Corll. Henley then led the police to the location where Corll had buried the bodies, which became known as the Candyman's house or the murder farm. The investigation into the Candyman killer case uncovered a network of young victims, some who had been missing for years. The crimes had gone undetected for a considerable period, primarily due to the victims being from marginalized backgrounds and the police initially dismissing their disappearances as runaways. Let me know what you guys think about this case in the comments, and don't miss my live tonight at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
In December of 2019, the Cobb family disappeared in thin air, and when police arrived at their house, they were utterly disturbed by witnesses and admits everything you need to know that no longer than walking into the home might be confused father and talk when apparently taking a whole bottle of Benadryl, wrapped in the blankets by the bed like the decayed bodies of his wife, their 3 children, and family dog. The police overdubs the story changed multiple times, but the one that stuck was that him and his family had tried to unalive themselves because of the upcoming apocalypse. Apparently, if they unalive themselves in the same room, they would stay back right together. He even claimed that all 3 of his children, who were aged 13, 11, and 4, claimed that they agreed to take their own lives. He was arrested and sentenced to life in prison without parole. They were utterly disturbed by witnesses and admits everything you need to know within a 1 minute. Walking into the home might be confused father Anthony Todd, who had apparently taken a whole bottle of Benadryl, wrapped in the blankets by the bed like the decayed bodies of his wife, their 3 children, and family dog.